Hello, and welcome back to the Survivor's Mic podcast. I'm your host, Posh, and as always, I'm excited that we are on episode 13, and we are also on a brand new series, right? And so, as you all may know, we introduced the Beyond Survival series, and this was really inspired by the idea of me questioning the fact that I have strength, the fact that, we have fought all these battles in life, and without a doubt, we survived them. But how do we move past that very idea of just being a survivor, right? Because I think during the times or the moments where you are going through life and you are going through things and you're fighting all different kinds of battles depending on your life, right? Because our lives are specifically tailor-made for who we are, right? And you go through all those things, and yes, you survive it without a doubt, and yes, you are strong, and yes, you have all the strength in you to go through these things. But what is on the other side of being a survivor, right? And we know that two things are true. It could totally and absolutely shatter you forever. And unfortunately for some people, they actually take themselves out of this life, right? Things like committing suicide or just giving up on yourself. And this does not mean that people were not survivors. They still carried those burdens until that very moment where they say, okay, I'm going to just maybe give in to drugs for me to forget this. Or I'm physically going to just end it here, right? Which is quite unfortunate, but it does not take away the fact that people fought, people did their best to sustain themselves while going through different seasons of life, especially the tough ones, right? But it could also go on the direction of, okay, I want to move past this. I want to find out what it means to actually heal from this. And I think there's something that we need to correct on what exactly healing means, right? What exactly do we mean when we say, oh, I went through all that, but I healed? There's really one woman who for years and since my childhood, I really looked up to, and I thought and I felt in my heart that she could be categorized as people who healed. And that lady is the lovely Joyce Meyer. And the reason why I say that is because there's a difference between talking about past events as a memory, or in form of bitterness and hurt and pain, or in form of saying, I did went through that. It was tough. I mourned for years. I hated myself for decades about it. But I'm still standing here, and I can tell somebody else who is going through the same thing that they can get out of that space. I think once you get to that space, then you know that healing is come. And again, I think the second thing also to correct there, when we say healing has come, we don't mean that it's a single process. You do it once, you arrive, and that's it. It's a lifelong process, right? You keep on working on yourself. You keep on molding yourself. You keep on, I call it the mind work, right? You really get into that space where you're working on your mind. And if there's somebody who is like me, whom you know you're doing the work, but once in a while, those same mannerisms, they like pop up in a minute. The fear kicks in, the hatred of being abandoned, the fear of rejection, it pops in, right? Because for me, it's something that is very personal, and I've suffered from it for years. And so when I feel like the things or the people that I really care for if I feel like that relationship or that connection is threatened, the fear kicks in. And I feel like, oh, they're going to leave. Or they're going to, abandon me. They're going to reject me at this point. And so I get back into that space. And I kind of like behave the same way that I behave when I'm just the Portia that really went through whatever she went through, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. I know it can be annoying. I don't think, I think it's disappointing to you first before it's disappointing to the person on the other side, right? Let's say in a relationship, for example, I think that's the best example I have. Of course, nobody wants to hurt the person that they say they love, right? And even in the quest of wanting to make sure that we keep this person, which is also not healthy. Let's just be honest about that. But there's a conversation for a different day, right? In the process of wanting to keep those people, we have to remember that before we even work so hard on making this person happy, on convincing this person that I'm working on myself, we also have to convince ourselves that we are getting somewhere, and we go even beyond convincing ourselves to actually see the results of the growth. So of course, if these insecurities pops up along the way, if the fear kicks in, it does not mean that you're not healing. It does not mean that you're not doing the process, right? So interestingly, I published, an episode on Substack for those of you who follow the podcast's newsletter. And I spoke about this and I said, look at this scenario as the remote control, right? And when we live life, especially beyond the actual events, not the effects, not the pain that comes afterwards, or the remembrance, right, of the events. But when we actually move out of it physically, it almost feels like a remote control. You sit right there, and it's like, if you're not into sci-fi, why would you watch that? Especially if you're in the room on your own. And I'm talking about people who are maybe probably single, without children, right? You don't have to watch that. If your child was there and they love that, then you're kind of like stuck with it. But if you're on your own, you kind of like switch, and if you're into romantic movies, then you switch to that. If you are into, documentaries, I'm one of those people who love to see real stuff that happen in real life, just for me to know, what we have in the world, and to always be aware. So you switch, right? And I've been really thinking about it, especially when I was writing that article over the weekend, that ultimately it's my choice to say, okay, I've gone through this, I survived this, I want to live my life this way at this point. And that doesn't also mean that you become a perfect person. That doesn't mean that you become a guru at healing. It's, again, a process, right? So that's where we choose, or we pick things like going to therapy, which is something that for most people it's really, it's a struggle. But I think if you're listening to me and you've been contemplating on it, I would say to you, if you're someone who battles with being misunderstood, I'm one of those people, and you feel like conversations can become very frustrating, either, with family or with your loved ones, your best bet is a therapist. And the reason for that is because just they are not connected to you emotionally. They're connected to you financially because you pay them for their service. And so both of you are going to do justice to each other because they know you have paid them and you know you have paid your money, right? Go for it. Go for it. Now back to what I was talking about. So we start picking these things. Go to therapy, you try to figure out what exactly do I love, and you start doing those things. You start to, one of the things I'm doing is actually decluttering my life. And what I mean by that is most of the times we do talk about, removing toxic friends, making sure that nowadays people call it your frequency. I don't know much about that kind of language, but really you just want to make sure that your environment is as clean as possible. And what I'm actually doing at the moment, or this summer, is I'm doing the same thing with my wardrobe. I'm doing the same thing with, the books that I've been reading, the ones I feel like I've outgrown, I have to give them away. I'm doing the same with friends, of course. The space that I keep, the people that I spend time with. And above all, the kind of thoughts that I entertain in my head. I'm really doing this all-round decluttering, because I realize if I want to move forward, I absolutely have that choice, and it's really in my hands to decide what I'm going to be entertaining and what I'm not going to be entertaining, right? And so for me, that example or that scenario of a remote control, it just really came into my head, because I was like, it has to be this simple. Of course, it's not simple, because healing and change is really something that challenges us as a people, right? But once you're able to do it, you would actually realize it's that simple. Now, does it mean that even when you have grown to be someone who knows how to control their thoughts and how to, clean up their space and the thought process and the people around them, it doesn't mean you don't make those mistakes again ever. That is not true. There are moments that will come that you really look at yourself and think, I don't really think I can do this. And again, of course, you will come back to your senses, and you have to convince yourself again, and you have to be strong again, and you have to move again. But really, when I thought about this idea of what it could possibly mean to live beyond survival, to live beyond the fact that I am a survivor, and there's every reason for you to look at yourself in the mirror and be proud of yourself, because you truly are a survivor. But I think once you pass through that bridge of just surviving it, the next thing that you need is to be at peace in life. Because survival mode on its own, it requires so much energy. And there will have to be a point where you kind of like give it up. And you say, you know what? It's been great. But if I'll be honest, I'm tired. Because it's tiring, right? So really, as we go through the week, I just want you to kind of like just think about it a little bit. Just ponder around that whole thought. And you would really, truly realize that if you really look at it, it's absolutely in our power, in our hands, to say, I want to live differently and I want to live past this. And of course, there's a difference between living past something, forgiving people and moving on, and having to forget things. Things don't get rubbed off of our minds, of our memory. I pray to God it could have happened to me, right? It doesn't happen like that. But I think the beauty in, or the reason why God himself or nature has made it to be part of what we remember, it's because once you get to that other side of healing, it's the most fulfilling thing to actually look back and remember each and every event, but you don't carry resentment for the people that did that. You don't carry the hate. You don't see their name or see their faces and get so frustrated and feel suffocated anymore. I think that's the highest level of being liberated in life. So I'm really looking forward to talking or having more conversations around the Beyond Survival series, and really let's take it 1 week or one episode at a time. And as always, come into the conversations. Let's have these conversations. For those of you who are following the podcast on TikTok, you can inbox the podcast. We always respond. You can, share your mind under any post that resonates with you. or you can do that also on any podcast platforms that you use or is available to you. And of course, we will engage on that conversation with you. And I'm excited. I'm excited about what's coming ahead of us. And I'm looking forward to having a great time. And above all, to get into our individual processes of healing and eventually finding our own peace. Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you next week. I'm your host, Posh. Bye for now.